Hi friends, welcome to the multiplication course by Steve Wyborney. This is a YouTube series for students in grades 3 through 8, and it's for teachers and parents too. I'm really glad you're here today. Let's start out with some quick introductions and then we'll step into this session. My name is Steve Wyborney. I'm a district math coach from Ontario, Oregon. You already know that I'm from Oregon. I'd love to hear where you are from. So in the chat, can you let me know where you're from and what you teach? And it's going to be great to have a chance to interact all throughout this session. So let's just keep the conversation going there, and I'll be happy to chat and answer any questions and learn from you all throughout this session. As we keep the conversation going and we move toward the multiplication course, which you're seeing here, you can see 12 chapter playlists. The course has 12 different chapters. Let me give you just a little bit more information about myself. So my name again is Steve Wyborney. I'm the creator of Splat. I'm the creator of Fraction Splat. I have a blog which I use to share resources. I created the estimation clipboard. I've presented at conferences from Seattle to Orlando and from Washington, D.C. to San Diego. I'm also the creator of Estimysteries. To date, I've given away more than 1 million free copies of resources to educators around the world by posting them on my blog. The multiplication course is another free resource. However, the student videos are not posted on my blog. Instead, I posted them on YouTube. And so we're going to take a close look at that today, some different ways that you can use it, how you can access it, and why it might be beneficial to you, to your students, and to your families. This presentation is somewhat unique in that you might want to have both the presentation and YouTube open at the same time. And you can either split your screen so that you have both tabs open, or you can navigate back and forth between the tabs, or simply watch the presentation, whichever works best for you. Okay, to access the course, you can simply click on the link that is in the chat, or in Google, you can type in my name and YouTube and find my YouTube channel. Or you could simply go directly to YouTube, and in YouTube, type my name in the search bar. Once you arrive at my YouTube channel, you'll see these tabs on the top, and the first one that you'll want to go to is Playlists. And when you click on Playlist, what you see here are separate chapters in the multiplication course. The best way to start from this point is to come over here to the right where it says Sort By, click on Sort By, and then select Date Created Oldest, because the oldest chapter I created was chapter 1 and so forth. And now all the chapters are listed in order. You can see chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and so forth. And in all there are 12 different chapters. Inside of the chapters are the lessons. So let's go to chapter 1. When you're inside chapter 1, you can play the first video, which is showing here, or you could play the second video, the third video, and so forth. Also, on the top you can see that there are 16 videos in this chapter. And one thing that's a little bit unique about the chapter playlist that I'm using is that these are series playlists. And what that means is that when this video finishes, it will move directly into the next video in order. So it won't move to a random video or a different video that you're not wanting your students to move to, but the videos will appear in order. After video number 2, video number 3 will be queued up, and after number 3, number 4, and so forth. And that's true of every chapter. Every chapter is set in a YouTube series playlist so that all of the lessons occur in order. Another useful feature to be aware of is that it is really easy to share the link to the video with your students. So here I'll choose the share button, and you can see the link here. I can simply copy it, and then I can use that link that's now copied to send to my students over email or through Google Classroom, or by whatever means it is that I send links to students. That is ready to go, and it's easy to share. And it's not just the individual videos that can be shared. Let's take a look at the chapters as well. Another tip worth noting is that when you're looking at the chapters, instead of clicking on the icon or the chapter title, you can click on View Full Playlist. And when you click on View Full Playlist for the chapter, what you'll see is all of the lessons on the right, the chapter description on the left, and then you can see the button labeled Share, which you can click and copy the link to share the entire chapter with your students in the same way that you would share a lesson. So you can easily send that link to your students, to your families. Here I'll just use a Word document as an example. Here is the link to chapter 1. I'll paste it. And then when the students have that, of course, when they click on the link, what they'll see is the entire chapter. And there it is. So they'll have access to any lesson that you would like them to view or to go through all of the lessons in order. Okay, and I invite you to keep the questions coming in the chat. Thank you so much for doing that. So far, that helps us to see where the multiplication course is on YouTube, how it's organized in the chapters, how we can access the chapters and the lessons, and how we can share the chapters and share the lessons, but we still don't know a lot about what is in the course. So we're going to move toward taking a close look at what's in each of the chapters and what is in the lessons as well. A really useful way to think about the course is to understand that Chapter 1 is different than Chapters 2 through 12. Chapter 1 really establishes the course, and Chapter 1 can really serve as a mini course all on its own. Chapters 2 through 12 build a conceptual routine that is repeated throughout each chapter. However, the concepts become more sophisticated as the chapters progress. So as we prepare to look at the content of the course, we'll structure this in two different parts. The first part will be looking at Chapter 1, and then the second part will be looking at the routine that's developed in Chapters 2 through 12. The first lesson in Chapter 1 will challenge students to think more deeply than simply recalling products to multiplication equations. Students who complete the course certainly will be able to recall all of their multiplication facts. However, the course will challenge students to connect those to many other ideas, and in fact to connect the new ideas to each other. And that's where the course begins. The second and third lessons of Chapter 1 introduce mystery structures to students, and they bring in a puzzle-like quality to the multiplication course. I'm using the reveal box just like I do in Mysteries, and the students know that there's a number underneath the reveal box. And then they're presented with a three-dimensional structure, and they're invited to find the total number of unit cubes by decomposing the structure in any way that they want. And then there's an opportunity for the students to pause the video so that they are in control of the timing, and after they pause, the video will continue. In some cases, the answer is revealed so that the students can check the answer again. And in other cases, the shape is decomposed and then the answer is revealed. So in this case, you can see that the total is 20, and then examples of 20 are provided. So for example, a student might see 8 in the front and 8 in the back, and they can think about two groups of 8 and what is the value of two groups of 8, so that multiplication thinking is introduced already. In addition, students might think of one group of 2 on the left and one group of 2 on the right. And they might ask the question, what is two groups of 8 plus two groups of 2 equal to? And again, we have the 20 right there so that students can reference that. And then students are also encouraged to see this in more than one way. So here we can see a group of 10 in the front and another group of 10 in the back. So we can see that 20 is also equal to two groups of 10. And in some cases, there are additional examples provided. So here's another. Here's one group of 6, and here is a second group of 6. So at this point, we are wondering, what is the value of two groups of 6? And then the part that is still shown in blue, we can feature that. So here is one group of 4 and two groups of 4. And so now we can see that 20 is equal to two groups of 6 plus two groups of 4. So the idea of multiplication is being developed very early in Chapter 1. Let me put these back together. And this is a glimpse of what students will see in lessons 2 and 3, still in Chapter 1. One of the main reasons I'm using this approach so early in the course is that I want students to see and understand that numbers can be broken apart in many different ways. There are a lot of cases where students think about putting numbers together, adding or multiplying, but the concept of taking numbers apart is extremely important, and I wanted to create a visual so that students could understand that very early in the course. The next lesson introduces students to an animated multiplication table, which I've developed. And it serves many purposes. One is that it can illustrate how to read a multiplication table. So 3 times 5 is equal to 15, but other relationships are featured. For example, if we think of the fraction 3/4, we can see that 3/4 is equal to 9/12, which is equal to 18/24, or 27/36. We can also look at some other ideas, like that 2 plus 3 is equal to 5, so 4 plus 6 is equal to 10, or 14 plus 21 is equal to 35, or 18 plus 27 is equal to 45. This concept is really useful when students are thinking of multiplication facts and they realize that they need to decompose one of the factors. For example, if a student is thinking about 6 times 8 and they're not sure what the product is, one approach that they might take is to decompose 6 into 1 plus 5. 1 plus 5 is equal to 6. So instead of thinking of 8 times 6, a student might think about 8 times 1 plus 8 times 5. 8 times 1 is 8, 8 times 5 is 40, 1 plus 5 is equal to 6, and that can be a really useful approach. This lesson is much longer than this very quick preview, but that is one thing that the students will see in the next lesson, and the animated multiplication table is used throughout the course. After the students have seen the animated multiplication table and they see several concepts within the table, the next 2 lessons move to guiding students through the process of creating their own multiplication table on paper. So using the pause button and the video, students are able to move through this at whatever speed is comfortable for them, but there are drawing tips and specific steps so that students can create their own multiplication table on paper. This activity is spread out over 2 lessons so that several key features of the multiplication table can be developed along the way. And you'll see that sometimes I'm pointing out the pause button throughout the videos to really encourage students to go through this at their own speed and pause the video whenever they need to. This is really a fast-paced viewing of what's happening in that lesson. And one other thought on this is that some teachers opt to not have their students do this lesson because they're able to provide them with pre-printed physical multiplication tables to work with, or possibly they're using an online tool, and so the teachers don't have the students create their own multiplication table. I think it can be very useful to create the multiplication table, so I do encourage you to have your students work through these lessons along the way. Ultimately, this will feature some of the more challenging facts and concepts within the multiplication table, which is what you're seeing right now, the numbers, the products that are not filled in on the chart, and that will be useful for students to see those early on as well. As we continue through this quick overview of Chapter 1, please remember to send any questions my way through the chat box so that we can keep the conversation going there. Let's continue looking at Chapter 1. After students build their own multiplication table, then several multiplication properties are introduced in their own lessons. After that time, the multiplication table properties are represented on an animated chart. So we can see the identity property represented here, multiplying by 10, and then the commutative property of multiplication is represented here following that lesson. And students can see that there are some multiplication relationships that are shown on the chart in more than one place. After this lesson, students move back to the multiplication table that they've created, and they have a chance to shade in where those properties are represented. And at the end of that lesson, their tables look like this. And this is a useful launching point for one of the sequences that's coming up in the following chapters. Before I continue, I'm going to move back to the playlist for Chapter 1 so that you can see how the visuals really represent the lessons now that you've seen some of these structures or the animated multiplication table or how students build their own list or how the ideas are represented on the tables. You can see that just by looking at the icon or the thumbnail for the lesson. So looking forward, students are going to capture those 36 multiplication concepts that are still shown on the chart, but just when it seems like maybe the purpose of this is to simply reduce these to 36 facts that can be memorized, this is actually going to slow down and begin to deeply flesh out each of those concepts. So there's a lesson entitled 5 times 9 is more than simply 45, and then students are going to be reminded in this lesson, which is called Making Connections, that this is about much more than simply memorizing multiplication facts, and that while it is important to understand and know multiplication facts, that there are many important ideas surrounding multiplication facts. And then the lesson will end by really taking a close look at the factors in the lesson entitled Separate Ideas or Connected Ideas, and then it will conclude with what's called a multiplication motion challenge. So again, just by looking at the icons in the lesson, you can follow the sequence of what's happening here in Chapter 1. So let's wrap up our preview of Chapter 1 by taking a quick look at the final few lessons. Lesson 13 in Chapter 1 is entitled 5 times 9 is more than simply 45. Now, quick note, if this is the 13th lesson, this might happen on the 13th day for students, because what many teachers do is they simply assign one lesson per day. And so the student will see a video that's 4 or 5 minutes long, in some cases 3 minutes long, in a day. So this is lesson 13, and this is what students might see on the 13th day. So 5 times 9 is equal to 45, and that can be represented many different ways. We know that 5 times 9 is equal to 45, and so we can represent that as 5 times 9 is equal to 45, or 9 times 5 is also equal to 45, which means that 45 divided by 5 is equal to 9, and 45 divided by 9 is equal to 5. And we can represent 45 divided by 9 is equal to 5 in many different ways. Here's one. 45 divided by 9 is equal to 5. Another way to represent this same idea is like this. 45 divided by 9 is equal to 5. So 5 times 9 is more than simply memorizing the number 45. Here's another idea. If we have an array, which is 9 by 5, we know that the total is 45. And that array can be broken apart into 5 different groups of 9, and we can put that together and the total is 45. Or it can be broken apart into 9 groups of 5, and the total is 45. 5 times 9 is equal to 45 can also be represented as 9 groups of 5. We can use repeated addition and write the number 5 9 times to show 9 groups of 5. Or we can write 9 5 times. And if we have equal addends, we can easily group those addends. So here you can see 2 groups of 9 and 3 groups of 9. So we can say 2 groups of 9 plus 3 groups of 9 is equal to 45. 2 groups of 9 plus 3 groups of 9 is equal to 45. Here you can see 2 groups of 9 and 3 groups of 9. 45 is also the 9th multiple of 5, and 45 is also the 5th multiple of 9, which means that 1/9 of 45 is equal to 5, and 1/5 of 45 is equal to 9. This also means that 45 is 9 times greater than 5, and 45 is 5 times greater than 9. There are many, many ideas in front of us. So instead of simply memorizing 5 times 9 is equal to 45, it's really useful to understand that 5 times 9 is more than simply the number 45, but to understand that there are many very important relationships among these numbers. This is a really interesting point in Chapter 1, and I think this really features the depth of the course rather than some type of focus on quickly memorizing the multiplication facts. That was a lot of content all at once inside of one video. However, those representations are going to be repeated when the pattern begins in chapters 2 through 12. Let's take a look at how Chapter 1 concludes. Chapter 1 begins to close by reminding us that we're not simply trying to memorize multiplication facts, but we're also trying to learn ideas which are connected to multiplication. And in particular, one of the ideas that we look at before the end of the chapter is the idea of factors and how factors are related to one another. The lesson about factors helps us to see how we can take a number like 24 and decompose it usefully in many different ways. For example, we can think of 24 as one group of 24, and we can write 1 times 24. But at the same time, we can also think of 24 as 24 groups of 1. And that might look like this visually, 24 groups of 1. As this lesson progresses, students are able to decompose the visual image many different ways. So they might see 2 groups of 12 and know that if they can see 2 groups of 12, they can also see 12 groups of 2, which might look like this. And then as the lesson continues, students can decompose this in different ways. One example is 3 groups of 8. And again, if we can decompose this into 3 groups of 8, we know we can also decompose this into 8 groups of 3. So we can search for those. Here's an example. And then one other way that this could be decomposed is into 4 groups of 6. Here's an example. And of course, if this can be decomposed into 4 groups of 6, it can also be decomposed into 6 groups of 4, which might look like this. And while I'm moving through this much more quickly than I would with the students will have a set of factors to work with at the end. And very importantly, they'll understand that the number 24 can be thought of as one group of 24 or 24 groups of 1. And at the same time, it can also be thought of as 2 groups of 12 or 12 groups of 2, 3 groups of 8 or 8 groups of 3, or 4 groups of 6 or 6 groups of 4. But also very importantly, it doesn't have to be thought of as any one of those separately, because it's equal to all of those combinations of factors at the same time. And finally, chapter 1 will conclude with a multiplication motion challenge. And that is a challenge which is repeated every chapter, but with different numbers, in which students will write down numbers on pieces of paper and then tear those pieces of paper apart and move them around on a table or a desk or a flat surface in front of them to represent many different relationships among numbers. And again, that's repeated at the end of every chapter. So that brings us to the end of chapter 1, and a very important note at this point is that's going to feel like a lot of content all at once. There were 16 lessons there, so that may very well be spread out over 16 days for a student. So again, while that feels like a lot of content all at once for us in a compressed manner, for the students, the timing should be just about right. One quick note before we move into the patterns found in chapters 2 through 12 is that you really control the timing. If you're working with 3rd grade students, you might assign simply 1 lesson per day. Or with 4th grade students, you might simply assign 1 lesson per day. If you're working with 5th grade students, you might want a pattern that's a little bit different. And during this video, you'll see my recommendations for how to pace lessons based on the grade level. So you'll have that information to use before we conclude. Okay, now that we've taken a careful look at chapter 1, which really establishes the course, it helps students to see 36 key relationships to focus on, but also to understand that there are many very important, deep multiplication concepts to understand. We'll move to chapters 2 through 12, which build a conceptual routine, a routine that becomes familiar and repeated for students, but deepens throughout the course of the chapters. So let's take a close look at chapters 2 through 12. The pattern in chapters 2 through 12, the routine, is highly similar. Although it's not completely identical in all of the chapters, you can look at nearly any of the chapters to get a sense for what the rest look like. So let's go to chapter 8. We'll view the full playlist. And inside of chapter 8, you can see that this chapter begins with a chapter preview. There's a lesson entitled 4 times 8 is more than simply 32. There are 2 number concept maps where students build visual representations of a multiplication idea. There's a visual question mix where students have a question designed solely of visual images for them to answer. And then there's a structure. There's a 3-dimensional structure which the students can decompose in many different ways, followed by a chance to do that again, but this time connecting an equation or an expression to the way that it's decomposed. And then there's an opportunity to sketch the mystery structure, a structure that the students have been working with. They get a chance to learn how to draw that 3-dimensional structure. And I take the students through that step by step. And in fact, we're going to take a look at one of these in just a moment. After the 3-dimensional drawing, there's a multiplication tile challenge. It's a puzzle which requires multiplication thinking. These are really interesting, really fascinating, and really revealing as well. In some of the chapters, there are also lessons on how factors are related to the product or factors are related to each other. There's an opportunity for students to examine which multiplication facts they know, which ones they don't know, and which ones they're in the midst of learning. And then every chapter ends with a multiplication motion challenge. And again, this pattern is very common among these chapters. In addition, everyone starts with a chapter preview, which is a really good way for a teacher to look at the chapter and see what concepts and images are coming in that chapter. What we're going to do now is we're going to move to a hands-on activity, which is sketching a mystery structure. In just a moment, I'll pull up a mystery structure and I'll lead us through sketching this so you can see this through the student's vantage point and you can create something on your paper as well. Okay, partway through the session, this is a great time for a hands-on activity. So let's go through one of the mystery structure three-dimensional drawings that the students go through. So I pulled up Sketching Mystery Structure 2, and I'll step us through this in a similar fashion to how the students go through this in the recording. So today we're going to sketch this three-dimensional structure, which is made of small cubes, and here you can see that it's made of unit cubes. And for this activity, you'll need a pencil and a blank piece of paper. And optional supply, if you wanted it, would be a highlighter or a marker, but of course, that is optional. And for the students, I would ask the students to pause the video until they have those supplies ready. And throughout the course, students can pause the video at any point that works for them. If something's going too quickly and they just want to pause, they can do that. If they want to back up and hear something again, they can do that as well. Okay, so the video continues when the students are ready with their supplies, and there's frequently a reminder in the form of a visual image and my narration as well that says, as we prepare to draw, remember to pause the video whenever you would like, and I place the pause symbol up in the corner as a further reminder. Okay, let's go ahead and begin. So if you have your paper and pencil ready, let's begin like this. Start by drawing a small square on your paper. And right now your paper looks just like this. You can see your square, and you can also see where the square is in relation to the final product. From the square, extend these lines upward, and then complete two more squares. 1, 2. And now your paper will look like a tower of 3 squares. Next, extend these lines to the right, and you can see that they will be longer than the vertical lines. And then close them in to make 4 new squares. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now it looks like a wide letter L. The next step is to extend these lines up and complete 2 more squares. 1, 2, and now it looks like the letter U. And finally, connect these lines, this one and this one, and complete the squares by drawing a line here and here. So now the front face is finished. It looks something like a wide letter O. Your paper looks like this. Let's continue. Now we'll draw the diagonal lines. Draw one from this corner that looks like this. Draw another diagonal line from this corner like this. And draw another diagonal line from this corner that looks like this. Now we'll connect these two ends. Draw a line all the way across. And we'll also connect these two ends. So draw a line all the way down. Now that we've done that, we'll draw the rest of the diagonals on the outside. So draw a diagonal line here, another one from here, another diagonal line from here, another diagonal line from here, and we'll continue moving over to the right. Draw a diagonal line from here and another diagonal line from here. And now your paper looks like this, and we can see how that compares to the finished shape as well. Okay, now let's complete the interior and then we will be finished. Draw a diagonal line from this corner, and then from the end of that line we'll draw a line straight across. and notice where it meets the edge. Next, from this point, draw a line straight up and notice where it meets the edge. And now we're almost finished. Draw another line from here, and finally, draw another line from here. And now the structure is complete. Great job on completing the Math Sketch Challenge. If you would like an additional challenge, you can shade the structure with a highlighter or a marker or simply with a pencil the way that you see it. So perhaps what you see are 2 groups of 5 and 2 groups of 1, or possibly 2 groups of 6. You may also see 3 groups of 4, or possibly 4 groups of 3. Okay, that's a quick, very informal example of something similar to what you would hear in a recording for sketching a mystery structure. So now that we've done that, let's see where that fits within the sequence. When we're looking at the chapter playlist and we click on View Full Playlist, which I'll do for chapter 8, we can see the chapter preview, the conceptual lesson, the chance for students to create number concept maps, and then the visual questions, followed by a 3-dimensional drawing opportunity, which we've just traveled through, multiplication tile challenges, and then lessons about factors and an opportunity to learn more about multiplication facts, and then a motion challenge. So what we've just looked at is the sketching lesson, and you can see that the sketching lesson in 3D actually follows 2 other 3D opportunities before it. So we'll take a closer look at the sequence. The more that you use the course, the more quickly you look at these and understand how the pattern unfolds. But a really good way to understand what the pattern is by looking at the chapter preview for any one of the chapters, chapter 2 through 12. So let's take a close look at the chapter 8 preview. And remember that the chapter previews are very similar to each other because the routine is very similar to each other in all of the chapters. But I'll record this in a very similar fashion to how I did in chapter 8. Welcome to the multiplication course. My name is Steve Wyborney, and this is the chapter 8 preview so you can see what to expect in chapter 8. The first lesson in chapter 8 is 4 times 8 is more than simply 32. You'll see how these numbers are connected in many ways, and you'll see some very important relationships as we begin the chapter. You will also make some more number concept maps, which will include important ideas about multiplication and different ways that we can picture multiplication. Next is the visual question mix for this chapter. The questions are all pictures, and you get to decide how much time you spend on each one by using the pause button. There are 4 different styles of questions, and they become more advanced in each chapter. Then you'll examine 3 new structures. This is one of them, and you'll have an opportunity to discuss how you see each structure. For example, you may see 2 equal groups and use that idea to find the total. This lesson is designed to let you talk about math so you can share your ideas and hear the ideas of others. In the next lesson, you'll see the mystery shape for this chapter. The challenge is to see it in more than one way and to represent your ideas by writing mathematical expressions that match what you see. For example, you may see this as 3 groups of 8, 2 on the outside and 1 in the middle. But at the same time, you may also see it as 2 groups of 12, 1 group of 12 in the front and another group of 12 in the back. So you can think about how 3 groups of 8 is related to 2 groups of 12. Of course, you can see this in many different ways. So you can write many different expressions, and then you'll be able to think deeply about how those expressions are connected to each other. After the mystery shape, it will be time to draw. I'll teach you how to draw the mystery shape for this chapter. We'll go through it step by step, and you will learn how to draw this 3-dimensional structure. After the 3-dimensional drawing, we'll move to the multiplication tile challenges. You'll see a puzzle like this, you'll see the clue, then you'll see me set the clue on the puzzle for a moment. Then it will be your turn to use multiplication thinking to solve the puzzle. There are 3 new tile challenges in every chapter, and in every chapter they become more advanced. Then there is a lesson about how factor pairs relate to the product. After that, there is an opportunity to create the third list. The final lesson is the multiplication motion challenge for this chapter. The challenge focuses on the relationship between the numbers 63, 9, and 7. Get ready to show many relationships and many connections as you move the pieces around in the multiplication motion challenge. This is the Chapter 8 preview to give you an idea of what you will be learning in this chapter. Let's begin. Okay, so that's a quick look at what the students see in a chapter preview. But as you look at this, you can see the pattern again that students typically see. So in the top left corner, you can see the conceptual lesson about how factors are related to the product and many other ideas that are represented there. In the top center, you can see how students create a number concept map. In some chapters, they create 1 or 2 number concept maps, and in other chapters, they create 3 or 4 number concept maps. In the top right, you see one example of a visual question. There are actually 4 different styles of visual questions, and we'll get a close look at those in just a little bit. On the second row, you can see how there's a 3-dimensional structure. There's a reveal box, much like in Chapter 1, and the students can decompose that in many different ways. It really invites great discussion, great mathematical discourse. If students have an opportunity to be together, they can discuss that. Of course, in distance learning times, that's not always possible, but it's still a rich opportunity for students. And then the center image there, you can see, is a place where students do something very similar, but this time, instead of thinking about just what is the answer, what is the number under the reveal, they have an opportunity to express what they're seeing numerically. They can write mathematical expressions and equations, and they can actually write more than one mathematical expression, and then think deeply about how those expressions are related to one another. After that comes the 3-dimensional drawing. So now you can see where that fits in the sequence. So when the students are drawing, that actually happens after they've had a chance to really think about that structure carefully, think about how it could be decomposed. So the drawing experience is much more rich because of the context in which it sits. The students have had a lot of experience with that visual shape when they're drawing it. On the bottom row, the multiplication tile challenge, there are 33 tile challenges embedded within the lesson, and they move from fairly simple to fairly complex. And again, it's a really good opportunity for students to have a visual question and think about it in more than one way. So students, in this case, you can see the 28 and how it covered 4 different unit squares. They might actually decompose a unit square into a value of 7 and then multiply, but they could approach it many other ways. And then in the bottom center, you can see how the number 12 is connected to several different pairs of factors. And finally, the motion challenge, which wraps up every chapter. That's the one, again, where the students tear off the pieces of paper and move those around on the table or the desk or the flat surface in front of them to show many different relationships. So this is a quick look at the chapter preview that the students see, so they can have a sense of what is coming and how it all connects together. And since this is so similar in each of the chapters 2 through 12, the pattern really becomes familiar to the students so that they can concentrate on the content and the learning and the conceptual understanding rather than on what is coming next. They know what's coming next because the pattern becomes so familiar to them. Okay, moving forward here, we're going to take a closer look at some of the pieces that you haven't seen yet, which include the number concept map found in each of the chapters 2 through 12, the visual question mix, and the multiplication tile challenges. So let's take a close look at each of those. This is an example of a number concept map. Throughout the course, students create 27 different number concept maps with 27 different combinations of factors and products. All of the number concept maps follow the same pattern, but of course, the content in the maps is different. So there's a lesson that teaches the students how to create a blank number concept map, and then once the blank number concept map is created, the students will fill that in using the content from that lesson. So here's a quick example. This is the first number concept map that the students create. So in the center, they'll write 2 times 3 is equal to 6, and they'll also write 3 times 2 is equal to 6. And then moving to the top left corner, the students will draw a triangle, and inside of the triangle write the factors 2, 3, and the product 6. And that's all that there is in the first bubble, or in the first space. In the next area, the students will write 2 times 3 is equal to 6, 3 times 2 is equal to 6, 6 divided by 2 is equal to 3, and also 6 divided by 3 is equal to 2. So you can see that this is a fairly quick process here. Let's move to the next space. In the next space, students will create an array with intersecting lines. So they will draw 1, 2 by 1, 2, 3, and then they will mark the intersections. And altogether, there will be 6. And there are lessons on how students can see this as 2 groups of 3, 1 group of 3, 2 groups of 3. And at the same time, they can see it as 3 groups of 2. Here's 1 group of 2, 2 groups of 2, 3 groups of 2. Okay, in the next space, students will write that 6 is 3 times greater than 2, and also 6 is 2 times greater than 3. In the next space, students can write 6 divided by 3 is equal to 2, and also 6 divided by 2 is equal to 3. Moving to the next space, students will write the factors of the product. In this case, it's 6, and the factors include 1 and 6, 2, and 3. Moving to the next space, students will represent 3 groups of 2. And they may notice that they could also represent 2 groups of 3 in the same fashion. And then finally, this will represent a small portion of a multiplication table. So there's a multiplication symbol, and a 2 and a 3, and another 2 and a 3. And the students complete this by writing the products of the factors on the outside. So in the first small box, we're looking for the product of 2 and 2. 2 times 2 is equal to 4. In the next one, 2 times 3 is equal to 6. In the next one, 2 times 3 is equal to 6 again. And finally, 3 times 3 is equal to 9. An interesting note about this one is that there will always be 2 square numbers in this combination because of the format of the structure. So this is a quick look at a number concept map. The first time the students do this, they will follow the pattern and the instruction to see how it works, but after a while they will become much more independent with this process. Okay, here you can see that the number concept map comes very early in each chapter, so students are working with representations of an idea early in the chapter. After the number concept map, the students work on what's called a visual question mix, where they see 4 different styles of questions and they think with multiplication to answer those questions. So let's take a look at an example of a visual question mix. Here's an example of a visual question mix. This is the level 9 visual question mix. Remember, there is one inside of each of the chapters, chapters 2 through 12. And instead of narrating this, I'll simply walk us through this. So the students are taught in the beginning that there are some red shapes that appear throughout the visual question mix, and the red shapes mean to pause the video so that there can be time to solve the question. So part 1 in each of the visual question mixes is called cubes, and the question is, how many cubes are there? As the video continues, there's a reminder that says pause the video when you see a red shape, and then the first question appears, followed by the red shape. So here the students pause the video and they can approach this however they would like to in order to find the total number of cubes. When they unpause the video, the answer appears and it moves to the next question, and then there's the pause symbol. So again, the students pause the video, solve the question. When they unpause the video, the answer is revealed, and the pattern continues. So I'll move past the cube questions And that will bring us to part 2, which is arrays. And this is what the array questions look like inside of the visual question mixes. The question is, how many small squares are there? So an array appears, and then there is the red pause symbol. So students will pause the video to find out the answer to the question, and then after they unpause the video, this clue will appear, and this clue will appear, and finally the answer will be revealed. So the pattern continues. The students will see an array, and then they'll see the symbol to pause the video so that they can solve this on their own, at their own pace, at their own speed, and then when they're ready, they can unpause the video, and what they would see in this case is 3 by 6, and then the total is 18. And the pattern continues. Okay, I'll work my way past this part. You can see how many questions there are with arrays in the visual question mix. And then it comes to part 3, which is called identical cards. So in this case, there is a set of identical cards. They have the same number. All cards are upside down. One card will be flipped over. And the question is, what is the total? So here are the identical cards. The student can see that there are 8 cards, and then one card is flipped over. And the question is, what is the total? And then the red shape appears, which is the pause indicator. So the students pause the video to solve the question. And then when they unpause, the answer appears. So here's another example. Pause indicator. When students unpause the video, the answer will appear. After the identical cards, and I'm just moving forward through these more quickly than the recording goes, the students actually have about 5 seconds during the pause. So if they don't hit pause quickly enough, there is enough time in there so that the answer doesn't accidentally appear while they're waiting. Part 4 is called Sum Squares, and it looks like this. The students will see a rectangle. Some squares in the rectangle will appear. The question is, how many squares are needed to completely fill the rectangle? So here is an example. This is the rectangle. Some squares will appear. And then this one is a little bit different in that there's a challenge pause, which means that the students can pause it right here to solve the question. Or if they want to, if this feels too challenging, then they can let the video play and see 1 clue, 2 clues, and then they'll have the regular pause opportunity here. So now that they've seen that this is 7 by 3, they can pause it to work this out, and then when they unpause it, the answer will appear. So this is explained to them how they have a challenge pause and a regular pause opportunity. So here's the next one from this lesson. The rectangle appears for the students, and then some squares appear inside of it, and then there's the challenge pause here. So a student could work out that this appears to be 6 across if this were fully filled with squares by 3. And 6 times 3, they could work out what is the product of 6 by 3. That's not the only way to approach it, but that might be one way that they would approach it. Here's the regular pause. And then after about 5 seconds, the answer appears. And here's another example of some squares. You can see how there's a lot of spatial opportunities with this. And I'm just moving through this much more quickly than the students would see. This wraps up with the title screen, Visual Question Mix Level 9. So that's a quick look at the visual question mix. So the visual question mixes are here. They're usually in about the 3rd position. So students begin with a conceptual lesson. They have a chance to create representations, and then they have a chance to see visual questions. We've looked at the 3-dimensional structures, but one thing that we haven't seen yet is the multiplication tile challenges. And this is an opportunity students have in each chapter to use multiplication thinking to solve a challenge, to solve a puzzle, and they can do that in many different ways. So let's take a close look at multiplication tile challenges. The very first time a student sees a multiplication tile challenge, there's quite a bit of explanation about what it is, and how to approach it. And there's also encouragement to think about the question in many different ways. So this is the very first multiplication tile challenge that a student will see. It's an example, and this is tile challenge number 1. So the question is, what is the value of the shape? And then the shape is given. In addition to the shape, there's a clue. This is the clue, and the clue has a value. In this case, the value is 6. Now again, this one is used more for instruction about how the process works than for the students to find the answer. So I'll continue with this one. So the students can see that this is equal to 6. So this is equal to 1 group of 6. This would be 2 groups of 6, 3 groups of 6, 4 groups of 6, 5 groups of 6, and 6 groups of 6. So the total value is equal to 6 groups of 6. There are also many other ways to see this, like this: 1 group of 6, 2 groups of 6, 3 groups of 6, 4 groups of 6, 5 groups of 6, 6 groups of 6. Of course, there are even more ways to think about this. So if this is 6, then this is equal to 12. So I can think about 1 group of 12, 2 groups of 12, 3 groups of 12, which is equal to 36. So you may have noticed that the red rectangle is a different shape, but notice that it covers the same number of squares as the other groups of 12. Another way to think about this is to break the 6 apart. I'll show you an example. If this is equal to 6 and it's covering 2 squares, this is half of 6, and half of 6 is 3. If 1 square is equal to 3, and 2 squares are equal to 6, then 3 squares are equal to 9. So if this is 1 group of 9, I can find more groups of 9. Here is another group of 9, so that's 2 groups of 9, 3 groups of 9, 4 groups of 9. So now that I can see that 4 groups of 9 is also equal to 36, and there's still many more ways to solve this. Another way to think about the shape is that if this is equal to 6 and this is equal to 3, then I can find a group of 5 3s, or 5 times 3, like this. This is equal to 5 times 3, which is 15. Here is another group of 15, and 15 plus 15 is equal to 30, plus 6. So the answer is equal to 36. So there's several different examples of ways that students can see this. They're encouraged to look at this in many different ways. Okay, after that, the video turns silent. Students are in control of the timing and the pacing, and tile challenge 2 appears, and here it is. What is the value of the shape? The reveal box is ready. The shape appears, and then here is the clue and the value of the clue. In all of the videos, the clue is placed on the shape for a moment, and then it is removed from the shape so the students can see the entire shape. There's a note to pause the video until you're ready to see the answer. And then it's time to reveal the answer. The answer is, when the words fade away, the answer appears. And that is tile challenge number 2. Let's take a look at some more advanced tile challenges. This is tile challenge number 6. In tile challenge number 6, the shape appears, followed by the clue, and the value of the clue, which is 8. The clue is placed on the shape for a moment, and then it is removed. And in this case, you can see that it's necessary to decompose the 8. So the answer is not necessarily a multiple of the clue. Again, this is tile challenge number 6. Let's look at another one. This is tile challenge number 18. The shape appears, the clue appears, the value of the clue appears, and then the clue is placed on the shape for just a moment, and then it is removed. So again, that is another tile challenge, and you can see that this is becoming more advanced. And just as a reminder, remember that students can pause these and they can look at these and work on these for as long as they want. So the pause button is very important in this process. And let's look at one more multiplication tile challenge, which is number 27, so you can see how these become more and more advanced throughout the course. So this is multiplication tile challenge number 27. Here is the shape, and now you can see that there is half a square present in the shape. And if you count, you can see that the total number of squares is 8 1/2 in this case. So the clue appears, and the value of the clue is 4. The clue is placed on the shape momentarily, and then it is removed. So again, these become more and more advanced throughout each of the chapters. After the multiplication tile challenges, the students work with multiplication facts and concepts, and then the last thing that they do in each of the chapters is the multiplication motion challenge, and that is the one where they move the pieces around on the table. And notice how the multiplication motion challenge at the end of the chapter is very similar to the conceptual lesson at the beginning of the chapter, except in the beginning the students were watching the conceptual lesson. In the end, they are actually doing and creating and moving the parts of the conceptual lesson themselves. So we're almost to the end of the session, but there's one big question that we haven't wrestled with yet, which is if there are 156 videos, how do I use them? How many do I use in a day? And my suggestion, my advice is this: give your students one video each day and stay with that pattern in chapter 1 and in chapter 2. But as you go through chapter 2 and you gauge your students, whether they're 3rd graders or 4th grade or 5th grade or 6th grade or 7th grade, and you see how quickly they move through those or how hungry they are to move more quickly, then make your adjustments based upon your students. It could be that a 5th grade student would want to go through 2 or 3 lessons in a day because they're so short, but a 3rd grade student really may need to go through just 1 lesson each day. So go through chapter 1, go through chapter 2, and see how it's going with your students, and then make your adjustments from there. Before we wrap up, let's go back to the YouTube page one more time so I can show you which are the most important links to click. So when you arrive on the YouTube page, let me scroll up just a little bit, and you see the tabs across the top: Home, Videos, and Playlist. Playlist is the tab that you want to click on. So that will bring up just the playlists, and then you'll see all of the chapters, including a chapter that is a resource chapter for educators and parents. So there might be some useful resource videos in there. But notice that the chapters are not in order, so they need to be sorted. So you'll click on Sort By and then go to Date Created Oldest. And when you click on Date Created Oldest, that will sort the chapters in order, chapters 1 through 12. And then from there, I recommend not clicking on the thumbnail or the chapter title, but instead clicking on View Full Playlist. When you click on View Full Playlist, you'll see the description, you will see all of the videos, but a very useful feature here is that you can click on the arrow, which is the share button, and if you're in the playlist, when you click on the share button and copy the link, that is the link to the entire playlist. So if you send that link to students through Google Classroom or through an email or something like that, when they click on the link, the entire chapter playlist will appear. And then from there, you can assign all of the videos or some of the videos from that point. So that is my recommendation on how to navigate the YouTube page. Okay, friends, that's going to bring us to a close. I want to thank you for your time today. Thank you for choosing to come to this session. Please reach out if you have any questions. You can find my contact information here in the chat. But again, I want to thank you for coming today. I hope this will be a useful resource for you. It's ready to go, and please feel free to adapt this and use this in the way that works best for you and for your students. Thank you very much.